You suffer to live. This is going to be a video about pain and suffering, right? Pain and suffering and stuff, right? In life, you're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering, right? And this is sort of natural. It just is the way it is. That's just how life is, right? You're going to suffer and experience a lot of pain, and suffering, right? So what about this, right? Really, you can't really do a lot, right? Because it's inevitable, right? That you're going to experience some sort of pain and suffering in your life, right? It's just inevitable, just how life is, right? Pain and suffering, right? Pain and suffering is kind of rooted in life, right? Life is kind of based around pain and suffering, right? You again suffer to live, right? You don't eat food, right? You don't drink water for a long time, right? So what happens? Right? You become thirsty, right? You become hungry. That's the type of pain that you experience, right? And then what do? You work hard, right? Which is a type of suffering as well. And then you acquire the resources to get yourself food and water or some other type of beverage to drink, right? To calm your thirst and hunger and stuff like this, right? Pain and suffering, right? Everything's linked in life to pain and suffering, right? When you're you can't imagine you just sat down in a room and did nothing your entire life. You would just die, right? If you don't work, which is a type of pain and suffering, right? You cannot sustain yourself. You cannot keep yourself alive if you don't work, right? Again, you suffer to live, right? Pain and suffering, right? Pain and suffering. It's, again, of course, it's on different scales, right? I mean, if you're just a kid born in some impoverished part of Africa, right? Your pain, the amount of pain and suffering you're going to experience is going to be drastically different to, let's just say, if you were born into some kind of wealthy family in Europe or North America, right? Again, it's all pain and suffering, right? We all experience pain and suffering on sometimes drastically different scales, right? But nonetheless, we all experience some form of pain and suffering. Look at this church I'm in front of right now. We all experience some type of pain and suffering, right? That's just how it is. Pain and suffering is it's inextricably linked to being alive, right? If you're alive, you're going to suffer and experience some pains, etc., right? That's just how it is in life. It seems like life is like a lot of life is just based around experiencing pain and suffering, right? Pain and suffering. Again, you can't avoid pain and suffering. It's just, again, it's intimately linked to being alive, right? If you're I feel as if nearly all living organisms have some sort of capacity to experience pain and suffering, right? Any definitely mammals, right? A lot of reptiles, right? Any living organism has the capacity to experience pain and suffering. There's a reason for this, right? And it's because it's just a part of being alive, right? If you're going to be alive, you're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering, right? But again, pain and suffering, especially for us humans, can sometimes be on drastically different scales, right? Again, if you're born in some impoverished part of the world, right, you're not going to be, the amount of pain and suffering you're going to experience is going to be drastically different. It's going to be drastically different compared to, so let's just say someone born into a wealthy family in the first world country, right? Again, there's also different scales, right? Of pain and suffering, right? Different people experience different types and forms of pain and suffering, right? But again, we all suffer to live, right? That's kind of true, right? We suffer to live, right? You have to suffer to live and stuff like this. It's just a part of being alive, right? All living organisms have to undergo some form of pain and suffering to survive and to live, right? So what? Right? What about this, right? You just have to accept it, right? That you're in life, you're going to probably suffer some hardships, a lot of pain, again, a lot of suffering. You're going to experience this. It's just a part of being alive, right? You just have to accept it, right? Accept it. That at some point in your life, you're going to experience a lot of hardships, a lot of pain, and a lot of suffering, right? And you just have to accept it, right? Because this is just inevitable, right? Even if you think that you're doing all right now, we both know, at some point in your life, you're going to experience some type of hardship, right? And pain and suffering can allow you to You don't have to see it as a negative thing, right? Because it can be seen as a way to grow, right? It can be, well, which seems kind of absurd, right? But if you're into exercising and bodybuilding and weightlifting and stuff like this, right? Pain that has a lot of pain and suffering involved in it, right? Your muscles kind of get beat up a lot, right? But it's worth it, right? Because your muscles get stronger at the end, right? So likewise, right? A lot of if you're experiencing a lot of pain and suffering, of course within reason, right? I mean, if you're experiencing a lot of pain and suffering that's just meaningless, right? Like, let's just say someone's cut your fingers off, right? That's gonna be you're not gonna grow from that, right? But if let's say you're I don't know, doing bodybuilding and weightlifting, right? The pains of like your muscles growing, like you can see that's beneficial, right? You can see how pain and suffering can be useful. It could be a good tool for personal growth and stuff. But of course, showing you around this area, of course, within reason, right? Within reason, because a lot of pain and suffering in this world is kind of senseless, right? Kids starving in poor third world countries, right? Kids just starving, dying of starvation. You're not going to see any sort of personal growth from that, right? A lot of pain and suffering is just kind of senseless and stuff. It's kind of meaningless ultimately, right? People in third world countries, they experience a lot of hardships, right? And they don't really see any type of positive outcome from that, right? It's just kind of, this is kind of also another part of being alive, right? Like, life is just not really what you make of it, right? Life doesn't work the way you want it to work, right? A lot of people in third world countries, right, they experience massive amounts of pain and suffering, right? But there's no positive outcome. They just they experience the pain and suffering, right? But they kind of doesn't lead anywhere, right? They just end up dying and stuff. There's no personal growth. So you have to kind of consider that as well, right? Pain and suffering, sometimes it can just be senseless and meaningless, right? Life can just be kind of very difficult for you for no reason and stuff. And this is just, again, another part of life. This is just how it is. You have to kind of, embrace that. And it can be very hard, especially if you've been experiencing a lot of difficulties in life, right? It can be very hard accepting that it's all just pointless and senseless and meaningless, right? You suffer for no real reason. That can be very difficult. That can be kind of traumatizing, right? That can be very, very traumatizing, right? To believe that you're suffering for literally no reason. It's just randomly. You're suffering because of the circumstances you were born into and stuff. That's it, right? Nothing else. There's no higher purpose behind your suffering. That could be kind of traumatizing, right? But it could be it's also something you need to consider and stuff, right? Pain and suffering, right? Again, you suffer to live, right? Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. All living organisms experience some type of pain and suffering, right? It's just how it is. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. That's just what life is about, right? Life is about pain and suffering, right? You suffer to live, right? What happens if you don't put in the work to earn money or something like this, right? You can't afford food, so you suffer starvation and you suffer being thirsty and stuff. That's a pain, In order to get rid of this type of suffering, you have to, again, suffer. You have to experience suffering, right? You have to work, which is a type of suffering and pain. Then you'll acquire resources. Then you'll be able to afford the food you need to eat, so you don't suffer starvation and thirst. Everything's related to pain and suffering, right? In life, it's just that's just how it is. It's kind of very, very. It's kind of very twisted. It's kind of very sad as well. Of course, death and stuff like this, right? As well, if you're like a young man, right? Your parents might kind of not be here for a very long time, right? Then you're experiencing some sort of suffering related to that, right? You're going to experience some sort of pain and suffering related to your parents dying and stuff. This emotional detachment from them, right? Because they're not here anymore, because they've went into the grave, right? Pain and suffering is very scary, man. But it's just a part of being alive. There's no way to avoid pain and suffering and stuff. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. It's just a part of being alive. pain and suffering. This is the part of being alive, right? Again, you suffer to live. If you don't allow yourself to suffer in some way, right, like by working, which work is it is a type of suffering, and you do experience pains involved when you work hard and stuff like this, right? If you don't work, if you don't do anything, if you don't suffer in any way, right, you can't even stay alive, because you won't be able to work hard to earn money or something like this, and you'll just die of starvation or thirst and stuff like this, right? Again, you suffer. You have to suffer to live, right? Like pain, it's kind of like, imagine you experience, imagine you not having to experience any sort of pain and suffering, right? It'll be it's literally unimaginable, right? Why is that? It's because you suffer to live, right? Pain and suffering is just a natural part of being alive, right? You suffer to live. You suffer to live, right? Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. There's no getting away from suffering and pain, right? You suffer to live, right? Pain and suffering is just a natural part of being alive. Literally, it's unimaginable. Imagine, let's just hypothetically say, or theoretically, right? You're in some protective bubble. You don't have to do anything to survive, right? You don't experience any sort of pain and suffering, right? That's literally unimaginable, right? Why is that? It's because, life is about pain and suffering for the most part, right? That's why it's hard to imagine what it would be like to have no pain and suffering, right? Like in our entire history, right, as well, sort of, right, it is defined by pain and suffering, right? A lot of wars, a lot of revolutions, a lot of things like this, right? They're linked to pain and suffering, right? That's why it's so hard to imagine, right, what life would be like without any sort of pain and suffering, right? Well, across the world, right, there's a lot of starvation and stuff like this, people dying in famines or whatever. Imagine that didn't happen, right? Imagine we just lived in a utopia. It's very, very hard to imagine what this would be like, right? Because life really is about pain and suffering, right? And you have to just kind of accept that. You have to come to terms with that. You can't avoid that, right? You can't avoid pain and suffering and stuff. It's just a part of being alive. It's just a part of being alive and stuff. It's just a part of being alive, right? Pain and suffering. You suffer to live, again, right? You have to experience some sort of hardships in life, otherwise you don't get anywhere, right? You stagnate and stuff. Or you might not even stagnate, you might just die, right? Because if you don't work, you might not be able to afford any sort of food, right? Or drinks or stuff like this. Beverages, right? To alleviate starvation and thirst, right? So you might just die, right? If you don't experience any sort of hardships, any sort of pain and suffering, you literally might die, right? That's how fundamental that is, right? Pain and suffering is literally linked to you being alive. Again, you suffer to live, right? You have to suffer to live and stuff. It's the only way to stay alive, right? Scary, right? Pain and suffering is, it's fundamentally linked to us being alive, right? It's all living organisms undergo or experience some form of pain and suffering. You just have to come to terms with it, right? And it's very difficult, right? Especially if you're experiencing a lot of pain and suffering. That might seem very senseless, right? Like, let's just say you've been diagnosed with some sort of cancer, right? And it's very aggressive, right? And it's shortening your life drastically, right? This is going to be very hard to rationalize, right? But you have to, maybe, I don't know, come to terms with it, right? That life is filled with hardships. Life is really linked, it's fundamentally linked to a lot of pain and suffering, and it's just how it is. It's always been this way as well. Look at human history, right? Wars, conflicts, revolutions, other things like this, right? All linked to pain and suffering, right? Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. Show some of this off. Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. All living organisms experience some form of pain and suffering, right? If you look at the natural world, right? Look at what other animals, do. Right? What do? They have to undergo a lot of hardships, struggles, trials, right? And they also they experience a lot of pain and suffering, right? Sometimes a lot of other, there's like a food chain in the natural world, right? Different animals sometimes eat each other, right? They literally kill each other, right? They kill each other, they eat each other and stuff like this, right? They maim each other, they experience a lot of pain and suffering. And that's just, it's even seen in the natural world, right? Of course, for us humans, we don't really see a lot of pain and suffering, especially if you're living in the Western world, right? You're not gonna see just pain. Maybe you actually, because there was a ton of people, in North America and England and stuff like this, have cancer. And you see them dying literally in the street and stuff. There's a lot of homeless people and stuff as well. Even in the first world, so to speak, the developed world, the Western world, right? There's still a lot of pain and suffering and stuff like you notice and see and stuff. It's even with all our advanced technologies, we can't even really remove this natural part of existence, right? This natural part of life, right? Which is pain and suffering, right? All living organisms undergo pain and suffering. It's just how it is. It's always been this way as well, right? So you can't just complain about it, I guess, but you have to. You gotta come to terms with it, though, I guess, in some way, because it's just how it is. It's just a natural part of being alive. If you're alive, you're going to experience some sort of pain and suffering and stuff, and that's just how it is. There's just no way to avoid pain and suffering, right? It's just how it is. Again, human history, right, is filled with a lot of wars, a lot of revolutions, a lot of things like this, right? All of this is linked to pain and suffering, right? Pain and suffering is just a fundamental part of being alive, right? Let's say you were born into a protective bubble, you don't have to do anything to survive, right? That's literally unimaginable, right? Because think about it, all your life you had to kind of experience. All your life you had to experience some form of hardships, you have to experience a lot of pain and suffering, right, in order to survive, right? Because that's what life is fundamentally about. Life is fundamentally about pain and suffering, right? Life is linked to a lot of pain and suffering. It's unimaginable, right? Imagine life without any sort of pain and suffering. That's literally unimaginable, right? Think about it. There's no pain and suffering at all. That's literally unimaginable. That's literally unimaginable, right? Life without any sort of pain and suffering. Why is that? Right, it's because life fundamentally is linked to pain and suffering and stuff like this. Again, you suffer to live, right? Imagine you were born, right, into some sort of protective bubble and you don't have to do anything to survive, right? That's so unimaginable. That's literally unimaginable, right? Why is that, right? It's because, all your life you have to experience hardships, you have to do you have to experience a lot of, you have to do so many different things and experience a lot of pain and suffering to survive, right? So imagine being born into a protective bubble where you don't have to do anything to survive. That's literally unimaginable, right? Why is that? It's because life is fundamentally linked to a lot of pain and suffering. Like, being alive is just linked to pain and suffering. You again suffer to live, right? You suffer to live and stuff. That's just how it is. That's just how it is. You suffer to live. If you don't experience any sort of hardships and whatever, like anything like this, right? If you don't experience any sort of pain and suffering, you might not even be able to stay alive, right? Because you might not be able to work hard, right? Because that's the type of suffering, right? You might not be able to earn your own income by working hard and stuff. That's the type of suffering, and you might just die and stuff. And that's really very, very scary and stuff, right? Pain and suffering is just linked to being alive. If you're alive, you're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering and stuff. And of course, there's different scales, right? If you're born in the third world, right, or in some poor part of the world, right, with not a lot of resources, your family is pretty poor, you don't have any money to do anything important, right, you're gonna experience a lot more pain and suffering than someone born, let's just say, in England or in North America, right? Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. you cannot avoid it, right? If you're alive, you're going to experience a lot of hardships, a lot of pain and suffering at some point in your life, right? You might be thinking to yourself, well, right now I'm just pretty chill, right? I'm cozy, I got everything I need. But someday something's gonna happen, right? And then you're gonna be very depressed, and it's just how it is. And there's no way to avoid this. There's no way to avoid it. Regardless of like how you are right now, you're going to experience some sort of pain and suffering at some point in your life. It's just how it is. You can't avoid it. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. You're going to experience some form of pain and suffering, and there's just no way to avoid it, because pain and suffering is linked. It's just you suffer to live, right? Pain and suffering it's literally just a part of being alive, right? You can't avoid it, right? It's just a part of being human as well, I guess, in a lot of ways, right? Our history is defined by a lot of pain and suffering, right? All the wars, all the revolutions, everything like this is all linked to pain and suffering, right? It's a part of our history as well. It's a part of who we are now as well, right? You can't even imagine like our history, our world, and stuff like this without any sort of pain and suffering. It's just that's how fundamental it is to our existence. Pain and suffering. In life, you're going to experience hardships. You're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering, and you have to come to terms with this, because it's just how it is. It's just how it is. It's just a part of being alive. You're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering and stuff. You're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering and stuff like this. And that's just how it is. It's just a part of being alive. Of course, you might think to yourself, well, maybe not, but think about it. You do experience pain and suffering, of course, on different scales, right? If you were born in some part of the world that's very poor, with not a lot of resources, you're going to be literally, the amount of pain and suffering you're going to experience is going to be exponentially. It's going to be exponentially more compared to, like, let's just say someone born in England and North America, right? Of course, there's different skills and stuff like this and stuff. Still, you have to agree that. You have to agree to me, to what I'm saying, right? That, life is about pain and suffering, right? You suffer to live. That's just how it is. You literally have to suffer to live, right? If you don't put in any sort of hard work, if you don't work hard, right? What happens, right? You don't get the money you need, right, to afford the food you need to survive, right? You literally die if you don't experience any sort of pain and suffering or hardships. You cannot even survive. You might end up dying. I'm not even kidding you. Literally, especially in the world that we're living in, right? If you don't experience any sort of pain and suffering and hardships, you might not even be able to survive. You might literally just pass away and die. That's how, pain and suffering is fundamental. It's fundamentally linked to being alive, right? You live to suffer, right? Or I guess you suffer to live. Stuff like this, right? This is true, right? Pain and suffering. It's linked to being alive. It's just how it is. You can't deny it. You can't run away from this reality, right? That, if you're alive, you're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering and hardships. And sometimes, there might not be any sort of positive outcome, right? You might just suffer for no reason, right? Like a lot of people dying of cancer and stuff like this, or some other type of disease, they suffer a lot of hardships and pain and stuff, but there's no positive outcome and stuff. And this is just another unfortunate part of life, right? That life just isn't fair. It isn't the way you want it to be, right? And stuff. That's just how it is. Life isn't fair. It just isn't the way you want it to be and stuff. So you just gotta kind of come to terms with that and stuff. It just isn't the way you want it to be. Right, life isn't fair. It just isn't the way you want it to be and stuff. That's just how it is. And there's no way to you can't just deny this. This is literally a fundamental part of being alive. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. check out this area that I'm in. Pretty cool, right? But yeah, you know, pain and suffering, can't avoid it. It's just a part of being alive. And you suffer to live and stuff. You literally have to suffer to live, otherwise you die and you don't get to stay alive. That's very scary, right? But again, you have to suffer to live. There's no way around this, right? If you don't experience any sort of pain and suffering and hardships, you don't get to stay alive, right? You know, think about it, really. Think about it, right? If you don't experience any sort of pain and suffering and hardships, right, you can't even like stay alive, because you won't be able to work hard to earn money or something like this, and you might, you know, you can see where that would lead to, right? You can see what that would lead to, right? Starvation and stuff, dying of thirst and hunger and whatever, right? You have to suffer to live. It's very scary, man. It's very scary and stuff. It's very, very scary and stuff. Very, very scary and stuff. That you have to suffer to live. And you have to suffer to live. You have to suffer to live, right? And that's just how it is. And you can't just avoid it. It's just very hard. It's the hard part of being alive. It's just a hard part of being alive, right? You have to suffer to live and stuff, and you cannot escape this reality. It's just how it is. You can't escape this reality. It's just how it is. You have to suffer to live, literally, right? If you don't suffer to live, you end up, in a lot of cases, just dying or not getting anywhere, right? You have to suffer to live. That's just how it is. There's no way to avoid this reality, right? That you have to suffer to live and stuff like this. It's just how it is. Look at the tree. You have to suffer to live. That's just how it is. It's very scary and stuff, right? That you have to suffer to live, but it's just how it is. There's no way to avoid pain and suffering and stuff. That's just how it is. You have to suffer to live. There's no way you can avoid pain and suffering. You know, it's just how it is. It's just a part of being alive, right? You have to suffer to live. You have to experience pain and suffering and hardships to stay alive and stuff. And maybe even for personal growth in a lot of different ways. I mean, you know, pain and suffering as a natural part of being human, right? It's a natural part of being alive. You're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering and hardships, right? And stuff like this. But that's just how it is, and you have to come to terms with it, right? You know, you suffer to live. This is just how it is. It's just a part of being human, a part of being alive, right? You have to suffer to live and stuff. That's just what it is, right? You have to come to terms with pain and suffering and stuff, right? It's just how it is. It's what life is based around, right? Pain and suffering. It's just how it is. You know, our entire history is kind of defined by a lot of pain and suffering. You know, that's just how it is. It's just linked to us. It's linked to just being alive. You're going to experience a lot of pain and suffering, but you have to come to terms with it. You have to come to terms with it. Pain and suffering. It's just a part of being alive. You cannot avoid pain and suffering. It's just a part of being human, part of being alive. You have to come to terms with it. There's just no way around it, right? Again, you suffer to live, right? You have to suffer to live. There's no other way. There is no other way. And you might kind of be a lot of you might disagree, but you know, think about it. You have to suffer to live. If you don't experience any sort of hardships, any sort of pain and suffering, what happens? you end up dying, right? Because you can't afford any money or any other type of resources, to afford food and water or stuff like this to stay alive, right? You have to suffer to live. You have to undergo some form of hardships, some form of pain and suffering to stay alive. That's just how it is. There's no getting around this. That's just how it is. You suffer to live, right? Life is about pain and suffering. That's just how it is. That's unavoidable, right? Life is about pain and suffering, and that's just how it is. You can't avoid it. Life is about pain and suffering and stuff. You suffer to live. There's no way to get around this. This is just how it is, and you have to come to terms with it. You have to accept this. You can't get around this, right? This is just how it is. This is just what life is about, right? Life is about pain and suffering and stuff. You have to come to terms with it. There's no way to get around this. Life is about pain and suffering, right? If you don't come to terms with this, right, you're gonna have your life's gonna be miserable, right? Because you're not gonna be facing reality, right? You have to face the reality of what life is, right? Again, you suffer to live, right? Life is about pain and suffering. Right, that's fundamentally true. Life is about pain and suffering. You experience a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of hardships, and that's just how it is. That's just linked to being alive, and you have to come to terms with it. Don't deny it. Don't run away from the reality of what life is, right? Come to terms with it. Look at what life actually is, right? Look life in the face, right? Look at life for what it is, right? Life is, again, you suffer to live. Life is about pain, suffering, and experiencing a lot of different hardships to stay alive. That's just how life is. That's how it's always been. This was always the case, right? You suffer to live. Life is about pain and suffering and stuff, and you have to come to terms with it. Don't run away from this, right? Don't I don't know, ignore this or something like this, all right? You have to come to terms with it. You have to accept that life is about pain and suffering and stuff. And you have to accept it. And you have to come to terms with this and whatever. You have to come to terms with it. You can't just not accept this. You can't just ignore this and stuff. You can't just kind of, close your eyes and just go to sleep or something and just forget about this, right? This is fundamental, right? This is like the truth, right? Life is about pain and suffering. And experiencing a lot of hardships is just like what life is about. There's no way you can get around this, right? This is the unfortunate reality that we have, right? That life is about pain and suffering. Again, you suffer to live, right? Life, again, is about pain and suffering. It's just an unfortunate reality, but you have to kind of come to terms with it. You can't just deny it. You can't deny this. This is unfortunately the case, right? That you have to suffer to live. Life is about pain and suffering and undergoing a lot of different hardships and trials and tribulations and etc. And I can go on and on about this, right? But you get the point, right? That life is kind of linked to a lot of pain and suffering, and there's no way to get around this. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. It's just how it is. Pain and suffering. Pain and suffering. Again, you suffer to live. That's just how it is. You have to come to terms with it. You can't deny this. You can't run away from this, right? You have to come to terms with it, and you'll be better off, I guess. I don't know. You gotta come to terms with this. You can't just deny this. You can't deny it. Life is about pain and suffering, and you have to come to terms with it. You have to come to terms with this very unfortunate reality, right? That you have to suffer to live and stuff. And a lot of you might not be willing to accept this, right? But life is about pain and suffering, right? You suffer to live. This is just how it is. You experience a lot of hardships. You experience a lot of hardships, a lot of trials, a lot of tribulations and stuff. That's just how it is. There's no way to get around this. And you suffer to live. That's just how it is. You can't escape this. You suffer to live. Life is about pain and suffering. Life is about pain and suffering, pain and suffering, pain and suffering. And you have to come to terms with this. You can't deny this. You suffer to live, right? This is true. You suffer to live, right? You have to experience pain and suffering and hardships to stay alive. That's just how it is. 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 You have to experience pain and suffering. Right? You have to suffer to live, literally, right? You have to experience pain and suffering to stay alive. That's just how it is. That's just how it is. Look at that. Look at that. Kind of in some sort of church area, you know, surrounded by graves, right? A lot of these people had to experience pain and suffering. They probably, you know, and then inevitably they had to experience death, dying, which, you know, which is the most extreme form of suffering, right? It's just how it is, just how it is, just how it is, you know. You suffer to live, right? That's just how it is. That's just how it is. Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. It's just a part of being human, right? You have to experience it. You have to experience pain and suffering. You have to suffer to live. That's just how it is. There's literally no way around this, right? You have to suffer to live, literally. You have to suffer to live, you know. That's just how it is. That's just how it is. You have to suffer to live life. You know, you suffer to live, right? You know, life is about pain and suffering. You know, don't, you know, run away from this. Don't try and get around this, right? You have to come to face. You have to kind of like come face to face with what? With reality, right? With you know, with the reality of like life, with the reality of where we are, and you know, on our existence and stuff like this. You have to come to face. You have to kind of face. You have to come face to face with reality. You have to kind of, you know, which means that you have to kind of accept, you know, pain and suffering. You have to accept that we have to suffer to live and stuff, and literally. There's literally a plane right above my head. That's kind of funny. But you know, pain and suffering, you have to come to terms with it. You have to come to terms with the fact that we have to suffer to live. That's just kind of how it is. That's just how it is. You have to come to terms with it. You have to come to terms with pain and suffering. That's just how it is. We suffer to live, right? That's just how it is. Pain and suffering is just a part of being alive. That's just how it is. You know, pain and suffering, you have to come to terms with it. You can't deny it. Oh, bugs and stuff. You have to come to terms with it. There's no way to get around it. You suffer, we suffer to live. That's just how it is. We suffer to live and stuff. That's just how it is. You cannot get around this. You can't run away from this reality, right? You know, we suffer to live, right? Life is about pain and suffering, and you have to try your hardest to come to terms with this, right? You can't get around this. You can't deny this, right? Life is fundamentally about pain and suffering. You suffer to live, right? Life is about pain and suffering, and you have to kind of accept this. You can't get around this. You have to accept this.